pleased to say that Jacob Rees Mogg, the leader of the House of Commons, has joined our virtual Iftar for this evening. Welcome, Jacob.
Thank you very much. Thank you for inviting me.
You're very welcome. We can both see and hear you, which is in this new virtual world that we all sort of, a goldfish bowl that we all indulge, is a, you know, not an easy thing to say, but we can this evening. So it's very nice of you to join us and give up your time. I'll just be very quick with the introductions. You almost don't really need it. Jacob, as you all know, is leader of the House of Commons and the Lord President of the Council. He was elected as a member of Parliament for North Somerset in 2010, again in 2015, 17, and of course in 2019, July, I think it was, Jacob, you were appointed leader of the House of Commons, a very prominent advocate and campaigner for Brexit and much else besides, meetings of the Privy Council. But the main thing I think that needs to really be said is that you are an enormously enthusiastic supporter of Somerset County Cricket Club. That can't be
Yes.
That's really the vital detail, isn't it? Welcome, Jacob. If I could just start off by asking you what you know about Ramadan. I mean, how similar is it to your observation of Lent? I mean, I know about this with my sort of father-in-law who's not Muslim, who's a observant Protestant, but he does observe Lent. I mean, what similarities do you think there are?
Ramadan is much harder. I must confess my admiration for you all is enormous, because Catholic fasting is only required on 2 days of the year, on Ash Wednesday and Good Friday. But Catholic fasting allows you to have a meal and a snack. Well, a meal and a snack isn't too bad anyway. And we've got gradually softer and softer that Lent was a period of very serious fasting. And if you go back to the Middle Ages, an almost vegan diet was observed during Lent, particularly by religious communities. But as we've become more modern, we've become less thorough. And so I tend to give up alcohol for Lent. And I observe the 2 days of fasting, and I try to avoid eating fish on Fridays, but only really at home. I don't try and do that if I'm out. So I think we get off very lightly, and I'm full of admiration for people who in busy lives manage to observe really proper fasting all day long. I remember years ago I went to Egypt, and it was during Ramadan, and the temperature was getting up into the 90s, even up to 100 degrees. And our tour guide didn't have a sip of water all day, and I was so impressed by that level of faith and piety. So my admiration for Muslims observing Ramadan is genuine and enormous.
Just a little sub-question to that. I mean, what does the sort of act of fasting mean to you spiritually? I mean, you sort of said that it's perhaps not quite as sort of, full throttled as a sort of Ramadan in this a latitude, whether there's sort of, it's much longer. But what does the actual act of fasting, do you think, how does it add to your faith?
It's a very good question. That what does self-mortification do in terms of faith? And I suppose it is a constant reminder of God. That I'd be interested to know whether you find this, that actually, if you're hungry and you want to have something to eat, or you're thirsty and you want a glass of water, and you're not doing it out of love of God, that is a reminder of God that's very present in your daily life. So whereas prayer is a very active part of faith, that you kneel down to prayer, or you go through your prayers, or however you do it, and you have to carve out special time to pray. With fasting, it lasts all day long, and so you're thinking about God as you feel hungry. You think, well, I'm going to remain hungry because of my love for God, and because for all the great things he does for me, the least payback I can give, this modest payback I can give, is to be thinking about him during the course of the day. And I think that's the purpose of it.
Yeah, and I think you're right. And it also just sort of teaches you about, sacrifice, and also that those that go through this kind of deprivation for the same sort of faith, out of circumstance. Could I ask you? I mean, for you, obviously, it's you've been very open about it. You've been very sort of articulate about it. That faith is a fundamental part of your life. What role does it play in your public life?
Both a very important one and not a great one. That is to say, most of the time, political life is very secular, that there's very little religion that comes into it. And I mean, I think that's a good thing in many ways. On the other hand, it's fundamental to everything that I believe. What is the basic belief? It is love God and love your neighbor. And that if you love your neighbor, you value every soul, and you realize that everybody in your community is of equal importance and equal worth and equally loved by God. And if God loves us all equally, then as a politician, surely you should aim to serve everybody equally, and you should try not to be judgmental about people, because whatever they do, they are still loved by God. And you should also recognize, as an MP in a constituency surgery, if somebody comes to you for help, helping them is important because they are loved by God, even if what they're asking for your help for isn't important. And some people come to you about very major things, and some people about less important ones, but each one is of great value to that individual who is important because that individual is loved by God.
We do at the same time, it's stating the sort of obvious, live in a society made up of, fellow citizens of many different sort of faiths and plenty of them with no faith at all. You think faith, I mean, in some ways you sort of answered it from a personal point of view, but do you think faith plays, what part should it play in shaping society, do you think?
Well, I think historically the role of faith in shaping society has been of enormous importance. And if you look at countries across the world, you will see the importance that religion has had in shaping the societies as they have developed and evolved. You see it throughout our system. And you see it, to go back to my point about the individual and each individual having a soul that is of value, I think that underpins the structures in many countries across the world, and that if you go back to ancient times, then that wasn't the case. And actually, the monotheistic religions tend to recognize that each soul is equally valued by God, whereas the pantheistic religions really didn't take that view. And so it's a major presence in daily life that comes, I think, from monotheistic religions that affects people, whether they've got faith or not.
Okay. One last sort of question, Jacob, well, not last, but I mean, just for this sort of section, before I go to Iftar Awan, Daniel was sort of summed up for us earlier, Daniel Hannan, that, in a sort of potted sort of history that, going back 30, 40 years in this country, there was a sort of view that, centre-right ideas, and certainly the Conservative Party was not for, British Muslims, and they would just vote, for the other side, as it were. What has, seeing the work of Muslims for Britain, and also what we've seen in the changes in our country these last 18 or 3 years over the referendum and afterwards, what has it taught you about how that sort of worldview has broken down? And second part of that question is, what do you think people who are of the centre-right need to do in order to make that kind of change within the sort of British Muslim sort of society, whether it's from Brexit or anything else, or patriotism, cemented and real in the way that many people already feel it is real within the community? So it's a long-winded way of asking, but, what does the Conservatives need to do in order to sort of make this a reality?
It's a question that also applies from a Catholic point of view, because if you go back to the 1960s, you would find that most Catholics voted Labour, and that the centre-right was poorly represented by Catholic voters. And the question is, why is that? Why have the centre-right not been good at appealing to everybody. And what can we do to put that right? And I think the answer is to look at our shared values, because what underpins political decision making is, in the end, values. And the question we all need to ask ourselves about politicians is that politician on my side? And we as politicians, people like me, have responsibility to show to all communities that we are on their side. And this ties in with what I was saying at the beginning about the value of all souls, that we want to show that we are there to represent everybody, but that also we genuinely have similar values. And I think, to go back to the monotheistic religions, that actually the secular right is more tolerant of religious belief than most other parts of the political spectrum. We still value it, we still see its importance. Many of us still hold deep religious faith, and therefore we are on the side of people from religious communities. And that if we can show we share values, then we can hope that people will vote for us and perhaps listen to our economic arguments and our detailed policy arguments. But I don't think that somebody who accepts your economic argument will vote for you if he or she doesn't share your values. So it's getting back to first principles, emphasizing those, and the basic political idea of being on the side of the people you're asking to vote for you, which the Conservatives did so well during the Brexit debate. We were on the side of widespread and various communities rather than being in favour of what you might call the establishment. And I accept, speaking as I do from my background, saying rude things about the establishment may seem unlikely. But nonetheless, that was where the Brexit argument came from. It was on the side of British people rather than of elites. And that's really important politically.
And do you think that Muslims for Britain, in terms of the way they articulated some of that that sort of values and sold it, for want of a better word, phrase rather, do you think they have helped to sort of change perceptions, make that a reality?
Oh, I think they were very important in this. I think that the pro-Europeans were very surprised by the success of Muslims for Britain and by the voting patterns that were shown during the Brexit result. I think that lots of communities that the Remainers thought would be automatically voting for them turned out not to be, because they felt they had been ignored, and Muslims for Britain was a very important part of that process and that political evolution.